ended everything wasn't a scream. It was my father's voice. Cold, precise, final. Either you serve my new wife, or you leave. My name is Sabrina Flores, and that was the night my father turned me from a daughter into a stranger. No anger, no hesitation, just the same tone he used to command soldiers. I didn't cry, I didn't argue. I just stood there, realizing that love in our house had always sounded like an order, and that night I finally refused to follow it. The clock on the dining room wall ticked with the precision of a drill sergeant's cadence. No one spoke. The scrape of a knife against porcelain was the only sound left between us. At the head of the table, my father sat upright posture, unbending his gaze fixed straight ahead, as if the entire house were still under military command. Beside him, Renee, his new wife, sipped her wine with the grace of someone who already knew she'd won a battle I hadn't realized I was fighting. Her smile was polished, her silence practiced. The air was so still it hurt to breathe. Then his voice cut through it, steady and deliberate, the way he used to issue commands. Either you serve Renee in this house, or you leave. The words didn't echo, they landed like a verdict. For a second my chest tightened, and the room seemed smaller, the walls closing in on the last place I ever called home. I pushed back my chair, the sound of the legs scraping the floor was louder than anything he'd said. I walked upstairs, pulled my old uniform from the closet, folded it into the same duffel that once carried me across oceans. Every crease, every snap of fabric was an act of control, the only thing keeping me from breaking. When I came back down, he hadn't moved. Renee's eyes followed me like a satisfied observer watching a surrender. I stopped at the doorway, my hand on the knob. You taught me how to follow orders, Dad. I guess I'm following this one too. Outside, the mountain wind bit against my face as I started the car. Rain struck the windshield like drumming on steel, measured, relentless final. In the rearview mirror, I caught one last glimpse of him through the glow of my headlights, stone still unreadable. But just before the road curved into darkness, I could have sworn his eyes flickered, as if he realized too late that discipline had cost him the only thing left that ever loved him. Santa Fe was a city made of light and silence. The sky stretched wide and dry, the kind that never forgave softness. I found a small apartment on the edge of the desert hills, just me, the wind, and the smell of coffee, brewed the army way, no sugar, no comfort. Every morning, I ran along the red dirt road until the horizon blurred, where the mountains stitched themselves into the clouds like an old scar. Maybe people were just scars that learned how to breathe. My new job at the Veteran Support Alliance didn't pay much, but it gave structure to the quiet. I helped veterans fill out forms, search for work, remember who they were before everything turned into noise and smoke. In their stories, I recognized fragments of my own, the discipline that saved us, and the silence that broke us. On my first day, I met Liam Torres, the program's therapist. He had served with me years ago, back when dust and adrenaline were the only constants. He smiled faintly, watching me move through the office. "You still march when you walk," he said. "Habit dies slower than people," I told him. He nodded the way someone does when words are unnecessary. That night, unpacking boxes, I found a small parcel postmarked from Colorado. The sender's name made my hands shake. Sarah Flores, my mother. The cardboard had yellowed, the corners soft with time. Inside were several unopened envelopes tied with a thin blue ribbon, each one carrying the faint scent of lavender. I opened the first letter, carefully afraid it might turn to dust in my hands. The ink was faded, but her voice came through as if she were sitting beside me. "If he ever forgets how to love, remind him, not with words, but with your life." I stopped reading. The room suddenly felt too small. That single line, gentle, resigned, told me how quietly she had suffered, how much strength it took to love a man who believed control was affection. The next envelope trembled between my fingers. They were all stamped, addressed to me, yet none had ever been sent. Someone had kept them hidden. And there was only one person who could have done that: my father. I brought the letters to work the next morning, unable to leave them behind. During breaks, while the others laughed over vending machine coffee, I sat by the window and read another piece of her heart. Each letter was a memory she'd sealed away, a confession written for a daughter she wasn't allowed to reach. In one, she described the night he lost a squadron member during a training mission. He blamed himself for everything that dies near him, even love. I read it over and over until the words blurred. Maybe he wasn't cruel by nature. Maybe fear had been his only language, fear of losing control, fear of repeating the past. That afternoon, Liam passed my desk. He saw the letters, saw my eyes. "You don't have to fix him," he said quietly. I shook my head. "I'm not trying to fix him," I said. "I just need to understand the damage." The last envelope was different, its seal already torn. The date on the corner stopped my breath. May 11th, 2008. The day my mother died. Half the page was missing, ripped clean. Only one fragment remained. If he ever. And then nothing. I stared at the torn edge until the paper trembled in my hand. My skin went cold. No one would destroy her words unless they wanted to bury what she was trying to say, and there was only one person who had both motive and access. I folded the fragment, slid it into my jacket pocket, and closed the box. Outside, the desert wind pressed against the windows, carrying that low, aching hum only silence makes. That night, lying awake, I could almost hear her whisper through the sound of the wind. "You can't run from blood, Sabrina. Even if it hurts." 2 weeks slipped by in silence. No orders, no footsteps in the hallway, no voice echoing through the house telling me what I should be. Just the ticking of the wall clock in my Santa Fe apartment, and the desert wind clawing at the windows like it was trying to get in. I thought silence would feel like freedom. Instead, it felt like drowning in air. On Saturday night, my phone lit up. 48 missed calls, all from the same name, Dad. The screen blinked, went dark, then blinked again like a failing heartbeat trying to restart. I watched it until the glow faded away. I didn't answer. He used to tell me back when I wore a uniform that silence was the highest form of obedience. That night, I finally obeyed him. 3 days later, another call came through an unfamiliar number. The voice on the other end was rough and trembling. "Sabrina. It's Calhoun, your old neighbor. I thought you should know. Your father collapsed. And Renee, she's gone." The words lodged somewhere between my lungs and my throat. Gone where no one knows. The police came. The accounts are empty. I sat in the dark for a long time, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the howl of wind scraping against stucco. When I finally moved, it was automatic folding close, locking the door, driving through the black stretch of highway toward Valley Creek. The road shimmered silver under the rain. By the time I reached the ranch, the sky had turned to slate. The porch light was out. The front door hung half open. Inside, the house smelled of mildew and something metallic like forgotten blood. Renee's half-empty wineglass sat on the table beside a cracked plate. Next to it, a single scrap of paper, her handwriting slanted and sharp. "You made me feel invisible. Now you know how it feels. R." I crumpled the note, but didn't throw it away. The room that once demanded perfection was now chaos, dust shards, silence. At the hospital, my father looked smaller than I remembered, pale beneath the hum of fluorescent light. Tubes coiled around his arms, machines whispered beside the bed. He didn't look at me when he spoke. "Don't make this a pity mission. Then let's call it a duty one." I sat down. We didn't speak again. 2 soldiers sharing a foxhole, too proud to surrender. When the nurse left, I saw the discharge report on the table. He hadn't fallen. He'd been found after overdosing on his medication. No one knew if it was an accident or a choice. The next morning, I drove back to the ranch to gather his things. The air was heavy stale, dust coated everything. The photo of my mother had been taken down, replaced with the glossy wedding portrait of my father and Renee. I turned it over on the mantel, face to the wall. In the basement, I found a locked metal box buried beneath old blankets. Inside were financial documents, bank records, loan forms, and a deed of sale for the southern acres of the ranch. The signature was his name, but not his handwriting. Smooth. Too clean. The witness line read Anthony Flores, his cousin, the same man who once told me I didn't belong in the family because I refused to bow to tradition. I brought the papers to the hospital that afternoon, laid them on the tray beside his bed. "Did you know she sold the land I signed what she gave me?" "You didn't even read it. I trusted her." Maybe that was my mistake. You didn't just trust her dad, you surrendered." He turned away. I gathered the papers and saw a photograph slip out, a younger version of him and my mother, standing in front of a small Cessna, both smiling. On the back, scrawled in shaky ink, "For Sarah, the only mission that ever mattered." I left the hospital and drove straight to the sheriff's office. The sheriff, an old veteran with the same weary authority as my father, examined the papers. "This isn't just fraud," he said. "It's identity theft. Whoever did this knew his habits too well." He turned the screen toward me, grainy footage from the bank. Renee stood beside another figure signing papers. I leaned closer, stomach sinking. It was Tony. On the drive home, my mother's words from her letters echoed in my head. He built walls to protect himself, but walls keep love out too. That night I sat alone in the dark living room, surrounded by ghosts of order and perfection. My phone buzzed once. A message from my father. "If you ever come back, don't do it for me. Do it for what's left." He knew. He always knew. But pride had chained his tongue too long. By dawn, I was back at the hospital. Sunlight sliced through the blinds, painting bars of gold across his face. I placed a newspaper on his bedside tray. Renee's face stared back from the front page. "Fraud investigation launched." He didn't speak, just nodded once, eyes distant. And for the first time since I could remember Miguel Flores, the man who feared nothing looked terrified. The ranch lay still beneath the Colorado wind, its roof rattling like bones. Inside, the lamp's dim glow cast long shadows over the dust. My father sat in his old chair, staring through the window toward the black line of mountains. "You shouldn't have come back," he said. "Neither should she," I replied, setting the medicine on the table. I didn't speak again. I simply cleaned, changed his sheets, fixed what I could. He watched me silent, as though afraid that if he stopped observing, he'd lose what little control remained. 2 nights later, I smelled smoke. The barn was burning. He was inside coughing, dragging a metal box through the flames. "Dad, leave it." "There's something in here." I pulled him out just as the fire swallowed the wall. When the flames died, he still held the scorched box. Inside was a half-burned letter addressed to Sarah. "I can't command peace. I can only destroy it. If this is love, it terrifies me." The date was 3 days after my mother's death. He hadn't sent it. He'd kept it to punish himself. "Why did you keep it?" I asked. "Because guilt was all I had left," he whispered. The old wall clock above the mantel had stopped at 3:47, the hour she died. I changed the battery, but the hands refused to move. He didn't want time to start again. That night, Liam called. "The fraud unit traced her," he said. "She's in Arizona. Does Dad know? Maybe he doesn't need to." Later, from the living room, I heard my father's voice, cracked and low. "I don't know how to pray anymore." I didn't answer. Some repentance lives best in silence. By morning, he was already dressed in khakis and a pressed shirt. The old pocket watch beside his coffee engraved M&S, 1989. The hands twitched once, then froze again. "You used to say order saves chaos," I said. "It did until order became the chaos," he replied. That afternoon, Liam called back. We found who helped Renee forge the signatures. Tony Flores. Tony, his cousin. Blood. I told my father. He said quietly, "I trained him. He learned how to lie from me." "No," I said. "He learned it watching you pretend you were never wrong." He turned away, trembling, no words left. That night, lightning flashed through my mother's room. On her desk lay a note in Renee's hand. "I never meant to ruin you. You just made it too easy." And beneath it, smaller, "You're his mirror. You'll end up just like him if you don't learn how to forgive." The note wasn't for him, it was for me. Even she had seen what we couldn't, we were the same. At dawn, he came to my door, eyes wet. "She's right," he said. "I thought control would protect me, but it was fear all along." He began to cry. I touched his shoulder, and in that quiet, something shifted. Later that night, rain swept across the plains. My phone buzzed with a message from the sheriff. "Suspect located. Renee Porter, Flagstaff, AZ, requesting Colonel Flores to testify." The screen glowed in the dark. The final battle had begun not against her, but against the ghosts inside him. I'll never forget that morning. The Arizona sky burned like molten steel, and the courthouse in Flagstaff pulsed with heat and tension. The air smelled of dust, sweat, and old paper. I pushed my father's wheelchair through the heavy doors, his white shirt pressed his spine straight as ever, his eyes locked on the witness stand ahead. For the first time, he didn't look like an officer. He looked like a man walking into judgment. Across the room, Renee Porter sat at the defendant's table, her face pale makeup smudged, defiance trembling beneath exhaustion. When her eyes found us, her lips twitched, caught somewhere between a smile and surrender. Her lawyer's voice cut through the murmur. Mrs. Porter acted with the full consent of her husband, Colonel Miguel Flores. He signed every document knowingly. The courtroom erupted in whispers. My blood turned cold. I looked at my father. He didn't flinch, just lowered his head. "Colonel Flores, do you deny signing these?" the judge asked. "No, sir. I signed them. I didn't read them." The silence that followed was suffocating. His words landed like a stone in deep water. Outside the courtroom, he leaned against the wall, his breath uneven. "I signed because I wanted peace," he said quietly. "Peace without truth isn't peace, Dad." "It's surrender," I replied. He met my eyes, voice shaking. I thought being in command meant never being afraid. "No," I said softly, "it means knowing when to admit you are." And for the first time, Miguel Flores was not a colonel, not a commander, just a man stripped bare human at last. A few weeks later, the investigation ended. The truth came out piece by piece, sharp as glass. Renee had forged the signatures, opened hidden accounts under false identification, and funneled the money through shell companies. Tony Flores, my father's own cousin, had been the one to file the papers and collect his share. The final hearing was brief. Renee stood pale and hollow, her eyes fixed on the floor as the verdict was read. 12 years in prison for financial fraud and forgery. Tony received a suspended sentence. My father finally was cleared of all accusations. When the judge adjourned, my father didn't smile. He just nodded once, his eyes drawn to the sunlight cutting across the courtroom floor like a thin blade. Outside, we stood in the dry Arizona heat. He spoke first. "Justice feels heavier than guilt. Because guilt ends when you admit it," I said. "Justice begins after that." We drove back in silence. The desert stretched endlessly around us. Somewhere near the horizon, he spoke again, quiet but clear. "You still call me Dad, depends." I said, half smiling. "You still call me daughter?" He laughed softly, the sound of rust breaking after years of stillness. A month later, he came to me with an idea. "Flores Foundation for Veterans," he said. "Something that serves without orders." I agreed. The opening ceremony took place in a modest hall in Santa Fe. The room filled with veterans' faces, lined by war, softened by time. Liam stood in the back, nodding as I walked up to the podium. I spoke about service, not the kind that obeys commands, but the kind that heals, rebuilds, restores. When I finished, a few hands clapped hesitant and warm. Then, from the front row, my father stood. He raised his hand in salute. The room went still. One by one, others stood, two veterans saluting quietly, no words, no applause. I returned the salute, tears slipping down my cheeks before I felt them fall. That silence, the kind that only soldiers understand, was louder than any honor. It was respect born not of rank, but of redemption. In that moment, his dignity returned, reshaped into something purer, the honor of a man who finally learned to kneel before truth. A year later, my father died in his sleep, peaceful like a soldier completing his final mission. There were no alarms, no farewells, only the quiet that follows duty fulfilled. When I went through his study, I found an envelope on his desk. The handwriting shaky but deliberate. "Sabrina, you didn't just save me. You saved what I forgot to be a father. Serve your heart and you'll never leave. Dad." I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into the pocket of my uniform. Outside, the Santa Fe wind was fierce, snapping the flag above the porch. The sky glowed deep gold as the sun dipped behind the hills, painting everything in warmth that almost felt like forgiveness. I stepped outside and stood tall, my gaze fixed on the flag. Then I raised my hand in a final salute. Not out of duty, not out of habit, but out of love. Those 48 calls weren't apologies, I whispered. They were the sound of a man learning how to love again. The wind carried the soft clink of metal, the old pocket watch in my palm. Its hand still, after all these years, had moved forward by 1 second. Time at last had forgiven him too,